The Australian Financial Review.
Hello, I'm James Thomson, Chanticleer columnist at the AFR. Welcome to our weekly news breakdown of all things business, finance and markets. And with me today, as always, is senior Chanticleer columnist at the AFR, Tony Boyd. Tony, how are you this week?
Very good, James, and looking forward to the weekend. There's some beautiful surf hitting the northern beaches of Sydney.
Oh, excellent. All right, well, we'll get you to the weekend in just a few minutes, but we've got a lot to talk about today. This week, we're going to look at how Qantas's surging profits is firing public anger. We'll examine how the crypto contagion is spreading, and we'll look ahead to next week's latest bad news on house prices. But first, Tony, there's been a bit of movement at the station at the top of the corporate tree in Australia. I want to talk about a couple of these examples. The first involves quite an extraordinary story at shopping mall owner Vicinity Centres, which was broken by the AFR's property guru Nick Lanahan, and it revealed how former CEO Grant Kelley had his retirement brought forward over a sexual harassment warning. Tony, you had a look at this. I guess my big question is, how does this stuff keep happening in 2022?
Yes, it's a very good question, James. I mean, Grant Kelley has put out a statement denying all of the allegations, and he's also said that he didn't bring forward his departure because of what allegedly happened. But it's interesting that the board, led by Trevor Gerber, appointed a third party, a law firm, and to look into the allegations, and the law firm found that they were substantiated. I mean, my thoughts go out to Marie Fester, who was the head of corporate affairs, who was the subject of what the third party found to be, unwarranted sexual comments that were made. So I think this is a case where she's resigned, lost her job. I think it's understandable given the pressure, but very good to see that she's put a post up on LinkedIn, and it's great to see people really giving her tremendous amount of support, because I think she was quite brave.
Oh, she was hugely brave, and in that LinkedIn post, Tony, she sort of hints that she's going to continue to look for ways to make this issue, an important one for business. And she's worked at a lot of places, got a lot of support across the spectrum of corporate life. Really, you can only sort of applaud her bravery. Is this another sort of, I don't know, another reminder for corporate Australia, particularly blokes in corporate Australia, that this is not a way to behave. This has got to be, this sort of stuff has just got to be eradicated from the Australian business landscape.
I agree with you, and I think there are certain sectors of the economy that were slow to empower women and introduce greater diversity, and property was certainly one of them. The advertising industry is another one. And the construction sector as well. So there's been leading women trying to change all that. Marie, at one stage, worked for Susan Lloyd-Hurwitz at Mirvac.
Yep.
And Susan was a fantastic sort of beacon for changing culture. And there's other women in the sector who've done, tremendous things through the Property Council, actually, to, introduce programs to make sure that there are more women in senior positions and that they have greater flexibility of work. And there was one great initiative by Alison Mirams from Robertson, a property company, just to introduce a 5-day week. And that was actually to get the men so they could go to the sport on the Saturday, because the tradition was in the construction industry you work 6 days a week.
Yeah.
And that meant not seeing your children. So that was a great initiative that came from a woman. So that's how an industry can gradually change.
Yeah. The second management move I want to look at, Tony, is at Fortescue Future Industries, which is the green hydrogen division. It's really a startup, I guess, inside iron ore miner Fortescue Metals Group. Now, about 6 months ago, FFI hired the former RBA Deputy Governor, a guy called Guy Debelle, brought him on as the CFO, but this week he said he was stepping down following a cycling accident. Tony, is this a bit of a bad look? It's obviously unfortunate for Guy Debelle, but is it a bit of a bad look for Fortescue? There's been a lot of management changes at that place.
It's a bad look, and it's quite a shock, I think, to especially investors in FMG who are constantly looking to the company to justify all of the money it's putting into Fortescue Future Industries. Guy Debelle is stepping into a non-executive director role. My suspicion is that's the sort of first step towards a two-step departure. But look, Guy was looked very healthy and it seemed fine when I saw him last Monday week at the UBS Australasia conference in Sydney, and he gave a very impassioned speech. I mean, this guy knows that climate change is an existential crisis, and he wanted to have a big impact on that, a hands-on impact. But just the fact that only 3 of the 11 senior executives at Fortescue Metals Group are still there from 2020 tells you that there's tremendous turnover at the top. I mean, what do you think? Is the billionaire sort of founder got special challenges that others don't?
Well, yeah, that billionaire founder is Andrew Forrest, of course, and he's come back as the executive chairman. So previously he was the non-executive chairman, not involved in day-to-day operations. Now he's back with his hand on the tiller as executive chair. I think that's okay. I mean, it really, Forrest has probably always been an executive type chair, and it's just formalising it. But it's interesting that he hasn't managed to find a CEO for the iron ore business yet, and there's a bit of flux in this FFI division, this Fortescue Future Industries division. So I think, a period of stability to lock some great people in and keep them there, that would really help the business. I mean, Andrew Forrest is tackling a really big challenge here in getting this green hydrogen business off the ground. He's clearly passionate about it. He's clearly going to throw everything at it, but you need good people around you to provide the stability of operations, I would have thought.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes, James, if he's spreading himself too thin, because he's got Minderoo and he's got Tatarang. So these are 2 big privately owned charities, really, that are doing tremendous work in trying to remove plastics, trying to save the oceans, trying to get more childcare. There's so much stuff. But my understanding is that the new CEO of FMG will be announced in January. And I think what Andrew Forrest is going to ask that guy to do is remove whatever bureaucracy there is in the organisation, try and make it more, more efficient. So that'll be a challenge, and let's hope that person lasts for a very long time. Because, I mean, look, financial disclosure here, James, I do have shares in FMG, and I bought them because I thought that hydrogen does have a future.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, it's when the Chook Super Fund's riding on it, where we know it's important. So, Tony, let's turn to our first big story of the week, and that's Qantas, which this week it announced it had upgraded its profit for the second time in just 6 weeks. It now expects to make $1.4 billion in tax, that's before tax, in the 6 months to December 31. So that's a large amount of money, particularly given that analysts only expected it to make about $400 million 6 weeks ago. But of course, this big profit boom has resurfaced a bit of the anger we saw earlier in the year with Qantas when they were struggling with huge operational issues and cancelling flights left, right and centre. There was that term coined that you've been joiced on a Qantas flight if you suddenly got canned. Tony, you've been flying this week. How was your experience in the friendly skies, and how do you view Qantas's profits?
Well, yes, I did fly this week to go down to Melbourne for the BHP dinner. That flight, which was the first I'd taken since March 2020 when I came back from a surfing trip to PNG, it was a pretty good flight actually on Virgin, and I was given a special look at the Beyond Lounge, which is right up the top there of Sydney Airport. Wonderful view. I went to check the departures list, and who should be sitting there but the NAB CEO, Ross McEwen, who introduced me to his wife. And so to me I think that sends a message that Qantas doesn't have a monopoly on the country's top executives, who all have, I think, membership of the Chairman's Lounge. But one thing that I noticed on my little travels was the number of flights that are being cancelled. And I think this is something that really gets people frustrated. They book into a flight, they think they're leaving at a certain time, and then suddenly the flight disappears and they're forced onto another flight, which is obviously packed. So, look, I mean, you wrote about this profit upgrade. It's pretty amazing. How can you actually, potentially earn $1 billion extra in the space of How many months was it?
Yeah. Well, 6 months. I mean, this really speaks to a couple of things, Tony. I think everybody wants to travel after the pandemic. We were all locked up at varying levels for a lot of that period, and that demand for travel is still very strong. And at the moment, the demand is outweighing the supply. Yes, there's been a few cancellations, particularly in the last couple of weeks. Wind at Sydney Airport has been a huge issue, and there's been some wind issues at Melbourne Airport. So I think we can give Qantas a pass there. Their operational performance has improved. But they are going to have to be a bit careful here. I think everyone can understand that there's a lot of demand, and that will force prices up. But this sort of drumbeat about price gouging and that does present a reputational risk. And I think you're right. If you're going to be paying high prices, you can't have any operational issues. You can't have that spate of cancellations and delays we saw. So Qantas needs to walk the fine line here. But I guess if you're a Qantas investor, Tony, I mean, the shares are up more than 45% since the middle of July. So that whole thing, where they were sort of at their low and everyone was threatening to boycott Qantas, that's really passed. And because the Australian market's so concentrated, people are paying up and getting on board and making sure their tray table is stowed and off they go. I mean, this is what happens in a small market, isn't it?
Well, yeah, there was an old rule of thumb in Sydney that if you've got a car, you better buy shares in Transurban. I do happen to own those as well in the Chook Super Fund. But the point being is that wherever you go in Sydney, you are going to be paying $5, $6, $7, $8, $10 just to get to where you want to go, because those tolls are just ubiquitous. And by the way, they're tied to CPI. So you can imagine the increases that are flooding through at the moment.
Absolutely.
But as far as Qantas goes, their record profit was 2016, EBITDA of $3 billion. I checked the S&P Global Market Intelligence. They're going to make EBITDA of $4.3 billion this financial year, according to all the analysts' forecasts, and $4.4 billion the year after. I mean, are they gouging? I noticed Rex Airlines Deputy Chairman John Sharp says they are, but that's probably self-serving. Qantas has got a lot of aircraft sitting on standby. Now, the question is, do they have the staff to bring them online, and airfares would come down as more capacity came into the market?
That's a great point, Tony. We do have at the moment this global shortage of pilots and other staff. So that is the balance that they'll be trying to get right. I mean, Joyce would probably, in a perfect world, want more planes in the sky, because that would, that'd be a boost for the cash flow, and that'd help him continue to bring down net debt, which is now looking at record low levels. But it is the question. I've got a question for you, Tony, and that's should the Qantas pay back the $850 million or so they got in JobKeeper during the pandemic?
Geez, that's a tough one, James. I think if that became the precedent, there would be billions of dollars have to be returned by a lot of Australian companies. And I think there's been a lot of interviews in the paper today of Josh Frydenberg saying how disappointed he is with Scott Morrison. Well, I think the general population would be very disappointed in Josh Frydenberg's management of the JobKeeper program, because it wasn't tied to profits. It didn't have all of the things that you would expect that were actually used in a very adjacent country called New Zealand.
Yeah.
Very effectively controlling how much money goes out of the government. So, yeah, I don't think we could actually impose that on Qantas alone. But there's certainly at the moment market forces are at play. This is simple economics.
Yeah.
There's not enough supply and there's too much demand.
Yeah. I'm actually, this is a lonely place to be, but I've got sympathy for Qantas on the JobKeeper issue. I think that JobKeeper program, yes, it was poorly designed, but what it was designed for was to keep a bridge between workers and their company during those pandemic years. Now, lots of companies did pay back JobKeeper, but those were the ones that saw an immediate profit boost. So, they got the JobKeeper in March, and by July or August, their profits were back to normal. That didn't happen at Qantas. This has taken two and a bit years for their profits to bounce back. They've bounced back clearly very strongly, but I think, the money that Qantas got out of JobKeeper was what we wanted JobKeeper to do, to keep those workers tied to the business such that the tourism industry could bounce back. So I got some sympathy for them. That's probably a very unpopular view, but there you go.
Well, look, all I'd say on top of that is that why are you at war with your staff?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they had the 2 years of pay freeze. You're making record profits, or just about to. How about doing some deals with the staff on pay rises?
Yeah, that is the challenge for Qantas, getting that balance right between shareholders, staff, and customers. I think we're probably not quite there yet, but it's an evolving story. Well, Tony, let's turn to the second item of business today, and that's the collapse of crypto exchange FTX and the contagion that's flowing from that. Now, there's a great episode of the Fin podcast that you can get a lot more details of what's happened here. But essentially, we've got a crypto exchange where people could buy and sell cryptocurrencies. But this exchange was using people's holdings and betting them on highly risky, highly leveraged plays that the clients didn't know anything about. The guy at the center of this business, Sam Bankman-Fried, he's lost about $15 billion in the last couple of weeks. And this is quite a mess. There's a bit of a personal connection here, Tony, because I hate to bring it up again, that the Chook Super Fund had some stakes in Bitcoin miners, which seemed like a pretty safe way to play the crypto sector. But Tony, this week we've seen, and over the last few weeks we've seen that safety isn't quite there. Tell us a little bit about what's happened to these guys.
Well, look, the two Bitcoin miners that I bought in the fund, Mawson Infrastructure and Iris Energy, were basically a leverage play on the Bitcoin price. Now, this is the old picks and shovels strategy, James, that was used during the gold rush.
Yes.
But essentially, if you look at it, it cost Iris Energy. By the way, they only use renewable energy. It cost Iris Energy about $6,000 to $7,000 US to mine one Bitcoin.
Yep.
Which is basically just throwing computer power at it. Now, the Bitcoin price is $16,500 US, so they're actually making a profit. They've done what they said they'd do, both companies. And I think while there is this Bitcoin winter, there's no point selling these stocks. They're down 90%. I mean, you're just going to give up any option that you have over the return of Bitcoin, which, I mean, everyone said, okay, Bitcoin is not correlated to anything and you'll do fantastically out of it. What we discovered was it's correlated to everything.
Yes.
Like it's correlated to GDP falling. It's correlated to share prices falling. But so if that's the case, as the global economy comes out of, let's hope it's a soft landing, Bitcoin should go back up. So I'm not writing that one off yet. It's worth 2/5 of not much, but it's still there.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, one of the things about the contagion that we're seeing from the collapse of FTX, we are seeing lots of other parts of the crypto world under pressure. There's a number of other crypto exchanges and crypto-related businesses that are starting to crack and are looking for emergency fundraisings. But what we haven't seen, Tony, is it spill over into the sort of broader economy in a major way yet. Which is very good news for the broader economy. Do you think we can keep this contained to crypto? This latest set of problems?
Yeah, look, I think so. I mean, this is the crash we had to have because it's cleaning out, to be honest, a lot of dodgy businesses. Now, we know that in Australia here, Senator Andrew Bragg had a very compelling argument in favour of proper regulation of crypto. In other words, holding assets in custody, keeping things in trust. All of the things were not done by FTX.
Yeah.
And when I mention that, I should say that Jessica Sire, our crypto writer, is doing a fantastic job on this because there's just dominoes falling all over the place. But the underlying blockchain that is the basis of Bitcoin and also Ethereum are still there and they're not breaking down. And that looks like it's going to be sustained. So the clearing out of all these businesses on the top, which were highly speculative and not run in accordance with what you would call prudent, consumer principles
Yes.
is a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
do you, obviously you're not in a crypto, you're not a crypto fan, I gather.
No, look, I'm not. I think there's some good technology. I actually talked to a fund manager, Tony, this week, who's based out of the Bahamas, a guy called Mark Holowesco, who used to run Franklin Templeton with Sir John Templeton. He had a great story. Obviously, a lot of these FTX was Bahamas based, and he was telling me how there's across the road from him is a bank that is supposed to hold a lot of crypto assets. And about 4 months ago, this bank wanted to, make its premises look a bit more swish, so they built a wall around the bank to look a bit more impressive. And the wall fell down because the foundations hadn't been made properly. And Mark Holowesco sort of saw that and he thought, yep, that's the top of the crypto market. And it turns out he was about right. But
so the moat around cryptos collapsed, has it?
Literally. But he had one really good point. And in the Bahamas, they actually have a central bank-backed cryptocurrency. It's called a sand coin. And it's useful because a lot of the islands in the Bahamas don't have banks themselves. So being able to have an alternative currency is actually quite helpful. And it being a digital one is extra helpful. But that currency is audited and it's all carefully stored and all that stuff. So that to me is an example of how the technology could be useful. Do you have any other... What's the other piece of tech or big idea that you think will be taken out of this wreckage and used down the track?
Well, one of my colleagues, Jonathan Shapiro, told me about a company that's come up with the use of blockchain as a method of cybersecurity for companies like Medibank Private and Optus that have got a lot of customer information. And, basically we know from Medibank Private that the hackers were inside the company with the same level of power as an administrator, so they could do whatever they liked. But the idea with this is that you have 3 or 4 different levels of access, each one requiring a blockchain, and you would have to provide the right 3 separate levels of data 3 separate levels of, I suppose, encryption access to get to the customer information. And of course, there'd be warnings that would go off even if an administrator tried to do that. So potentially there is something there for a blockchain to be used in some other manner other than the speculative aspects that have been so much at the front of people's minds.
Yeah, well, that'll be the thing. I mean, we got a lot of good things out of the wreckage of the dot-com bubble in the year 2000, so I'm sure there'll be good stuff to come out of this, but it's going to be a bit of a mess for a while now. Tony, we're going to come back after the break, and I'm going to ask you about the barbecue stopper of Australian life, and that's house prices. Right, Tony, before we jump into what's coming up this week, I would just like to tell people about the Chanticleer newsletter, which is available to AFR subscribers. Comes out every week, and it's got the podcast and some links to some of our best columns. And you can sign up if you're an AFR subscriber at join.afr.com/Chanticleer. All right, Tony, we've got a big event happening in Sydney on Monday, I should say. That's the AFR's CFO Live event, and I'm sitting down with Anthony Gianotti from who's the CFO of Wesfarmers. Going to be great to find out from some of these CFOs how the economy is tracking. We talked last week about how we've had a lot of AGM trading updates. It's still a bit of a mystery to me that things look pretty robust still. Tony, we saw Harvey Norman last week was okay, and Qantas was obviously had a really good trading update. Are you getting any vibes from this data?
Yeah, look, it's been pretty positive, hasn't it? I mean, we had our infrastructure summit last week, and obviously there's a whole lot of big programs that are progressing ahead, and wherever you look around North Sydney, there's just construction workers everywhere. There's 4 or 5 buildings going up, and whenever I commute to work in the morning, there's all these metro stations being built. So there's all sorts of economic activity that's not going to change because of rising interest rates at the RBA. But the CFO Live, I mean, I don't know whether you're going to pick up on this point, James, but it just seems there's an increasing number of CFOs are stepping up to become CEOs in Australia. And so when you gather all these people in the room, they're actually not just doing the numbers anymore, are they? They're actually involved in strategy, and they potentially have a pathway to actually run the whole company.
Yeah, I think some people, and perhaps once upon a time they saw it as the sort of glorified internal accountant, but it's not that anymore. It's much more about strategy and portfolio management and those cool things. One of the big things we'll be talking about to our CFOs is inflation. And next week we get a bit of data from overseas. Next Thursday we get European inflation, which might be pushing up towards double figures. And we also get US data, including the personal consumption expenditure reading, which is a sort of proxy for inflation that the Fed studies very closely. I guess in Europe, Tony, we're coming into this winter period where we're worried about what happens to energy prices, and it's starting to get cold.
Yes, it's going to be a difficult winter for Europe. Actually, I just might mention The Economist magazine this week has a cover of it's called Frozen Out, and how the world is leaving Europe behind. And it's basically saying that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has put so much pressure on that part of the world that they've got higher energy prices, financial vulnerabilities, all sorts of problems, largely because they became far too reliant on Russian energy. And it's something that, it's easy to say in hindsight, but that getting themselves out of that is so damaging to their economy. And let's hope it's not too cold in Europe this year, because that'll just exacerbate the problems. Yeah, and we're seeing spot LNG cargo prices going up in Asia at the moment too, because, Europeans are trying to get as much of that gas as possible. So there's global ramifications here. The other big data point I mentioned, Tony, is house prices. We get the official reading from CoreLogic on Thursday, which will give us what's happened to house prices in November. This is the part of the economy, Tony, that's feeling the heat from interest rates most acutely, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. And it's obviously house prices are falling across all of our major capital cities. And I always, well, not always, but I generally turn to Bill Evans at Westpac for that sort of very experienced, cool-headed view. And he says they're going to be down by about 14% by the middle of 2024.
Right.
I mean, of course, it depends where you live. And, some suburbs have just not gone down at all. I mean, we've got this incredible story on our website and in the paper tomorrow about a nice house down there at Tamarama, which is going to go for about $50 million. Jeez. Overlooking the ocean, built in the 1920s. It's obviously a knockdown job, but that's the stratosphere of Australian property. Yeah. Whereas, for the man and woman in the street, it is tough when your single largest investment is going backwards and you're still paying mortgage on it. But I don't know. Have you think that this type of affects people's mentality, their psychology towards spending?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, I'm more interested in why you're selling up at Tamarama, Tony. No, just kidding.
No, it's not me.
I think I was looking at the CoreLogic data so far. So the 5 capital cities readings down 5% over the last year. Sydney's down 10.3%. I think these price falls will continue. Bill Evans says 14%. I think I can see 20% by the time we're done, because the RBA's still got some work to do. We've still got some rate rises that'll probably keep coming through in the first quarter of next year. So, and then the lag effect is probably 6 to 9 months. So we might not feel the full brunt of it till the start of 2024. So this is a developing story. So let me get your price fall from peak to trough. Where are you sitting at? Are you sitting with Bill at 14% or so?
Look, I think so, mainly because immigration's going to open up. I think we'll have 200,000 people coming to the country every year.
Yep.
And governments have proven to be very slow at opening up new areas for development. So that there will be a supply shortage as demand goes up. So that's my... I reckon 14's about right.
Well, I'm going to stick with the top end of Christopher Joy, the AFR columnist's prediction. He's at 15 to 20%. I reckon we might see more like 20%. But let's see. It's a watching brief, and we'll have some fresh data for you next week. Tony, we love getting questions from our readers, our listeners, and our readers, of course. And you can send your question to Chanticleer at afr.com. This week's comes from Anastasia Hardman from Lewisham in Sydney, who asks, I'm a young lawyer who wants to move into a senior leadership role. How do I boost my financial acumen in a business sense? Where would you start, Tony?
Well, I thought about this one and went to my bookshelf, and I reckon Ben Graham's The Intelligent Investor gives you a pretty good starting point for how to think about companies, balance sheets, profit and loss, cash flow. And then when you've mastered all that, just reverse it all and that'll tell you how the banks work, because a bank's asset is actually a loan.
Yeah.
But I suppose for a career move, if that's what she's thinking about, a leadership role, you've really got to have those basics, understanding of the mechanics of a company before you can step up into a different role beyond the sort of legal counsel sort of area of expertise.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, look, I guess my instinctive answer is to do an MBA, which is a big process. So I did have a look around it, and most of the business schools have multiple options around an MBA now. So, Melbourne Business School has a 10-week course that'll sort of give you a overview. You can do a part-time MBA. You can take a couple of units in the MBA rather than doing the full thing, or then you can, if you want to take the big plunge, MBAs are very useful for a lot of people. So, but I think there's lots of different options. The other one, the Australian Institute of Company Directors has a company director course that would probably be really helpful for a broad sweep of what happens in Australian boardrooms and management suites. So that's
I think that's a good one for Anastasia. She's got a choice there between an MBA at $30,000 or Ben Graham's Intelligent Investor at $24.95.
Yeah, well said. Good point. Well, Tony, on that note, I think we'll head over to Amazon and see if we can pick up a copy of that one. Thank you very much for joining us again this week.
Yeah, good to talk to you, James.
And thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us again as well. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider rating and reviewing us, as it helps others find us. And follow us on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. At The Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com, and you can subscribe to The Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. Chanticleer was hosted by me, James Thomson, and Tony Boyd, and it was produced and edited by Lap Fan and Alex Gow. The executive producer is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.